Hey guys, Button25 here, watching the launch of Galileo FOCM something or other. I'm not sure of the exact of which satellites these are. Yes, anyways, let's get to the broadcast. Oh yeah, gonna use the screenshot button. Ariane Space. Service and solutions.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our fourth launch of the year from the Guyana Space Center, the second with Soyuz, and the 250th, including all Arianespace launchers from CSG since its inception. For today's mission, Soyuz is set to deliver 2 more Galileo satellites, manufactured by OHB System, into a circular medium Earth orbit inclined at 57.4 degrees above the equator. From liftoff until separation, the mission elapsed time will be approximately 3 hours and 48 minutes. Both satellites will be released simultaneously. Following an acceleration in the deployment of the constellation initiated last year, the European Commission decided last February to maintain the pace by adding today's mission, which is about to enrich the constellation with its 13th and 14th navigation satellites. This demonstrates the flexibility of the Arianespace launch vehicle family to adapt to customer needs. Moreover, the deployment will carry on this year and will be taken over by Ariane 5 ES, with a mission planned in Q4 for the launch of 4 more Galileo satellites, bringing to 18 the number of satellites deployed for this constellation. In all cases, mission integration is made in the framework of a contract signed with the European Space Agency, responsible for Galileo's space segment. Arianespace is thus very grateful to the European Commission and to the European Space Agency for their continuous trust in our launch systems, which makes the European Union Arianespace first institutional customer. It is a source of great pride for Arianespace to provide European governments and institutions with independent access to space thanks to its launch vehicle family. But our 15th Soyuz to be launched from the French Guiana is now ready for liftoff, so enjoy the show.
That's kind of his usual way of signing up. So 13 and 14.
Greetings, everybody, wherever you may be, and welcome once again to Kourou, the home of the Ariane family, for today's launch of Soyuz number 15 from the spaceport. You can follow all the action in English along with me, or in a French translation with Odile Lacoste, our interpreter tonight. The mission is to launch 2 more Galileo satellites for the European constellation. We're coming to you live, as always, from the Jupiter Mission Control Building here at the heart of the space base, where at this hour all is green and go. We're on time and on target for liftoff due in about a quarter of an hour. Galileo, you remember, is Europe's own satellite navigation system. In just a few years, she will be operating at full capacity with a fleet of 30 satellites. We're about halfway there, because today we're launching satellites number 13 and 14. And to do this, we're using the Soyuz launch vehicle. Now, I know the name is familiar to you because the Soyuz goes back to the early days of the space race. She was the workhorse of the Soviet space program and continues service in the French and the Russian programs. Today we'll be back with some history of the Soyuz later in the broadcast. But for now, some figures. Soyuz stands 48 meters tall. 4 stages in all. The first stage consists of the 4 boosters, each with its own engines. There are 4 of those. The boosters are clustered around a central core, which is the second stage. The third stage weighs 24 tons fully fueled and produces 30 tons of thrust. Atop this three-stage assembly is the fairing, which contains the upper stage, a dispenser for the two satellites and the two passengers, 13 and 14 Galileo today. The upper stage is called Frigate. It was designed to be an independent orbiter with an engine that can be reignited. That's important. We'll get back to that later in the broadcast as well. Soyuz, in all, weighing in at 300 tons at liftoff, making her Ariane Space's middle-sized launcher, lighter than Ariane 5, but heavier than the light launcher Vega. The green status panels, which you'll see shortly, are the real-time summary of the state of the mission. We check them from time to time. The information coming in here to Jupiter, looked at by, among other people, this group, which is the Flight Directorate. This is the Mission High Command, led by Stefan Israel, you saw. With him, Igor Novikov, Flight Director at the Russian Space Agency Roscosmos. Along with them, Roland Lagier, the Chief Technical and Quality Officer for Ariane Space. And representing the European Space Agency, Gael Winters, Director of Launchers, and Bruno Gerard, heading up the Ariane Space facilities. He's head of the Ariane Space facilities here. Anything unexpected comes up during the mission, it'll be their job to decide what to do about it. This is the fourth Ariane Space mission of the year, and we're flying for ESA, the European Space Agency. And we have a word with their Director General, Jan Werner, coming up for you right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another launch of Galileo satellites. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you, and also there is a new person with us. It's Paul Verhoef, the Director for Satellite Navigation. But I'm quite sure that it's not any longer just another launch. It's a launch, a routine launch, but with very experienced staff from ESA, and I'm quite sure that they will do all the best to have a successful launch also together with Arianespace. Galileo Galilei, he is dead since 375 years, but our Galileo satellite navigation system is alive, and it's more and more alive. So we will have another 2 satellites launched today, and therefore we will have about 14 satellites then in orbit. And at the end of this year, we will have another launch with 4 satellites with Ariane 5. That means we have then 18 satellites. This is already a good number for some first services. But it's also important that we are completing the full structure, the full constellation of satellites, of Galileo satellites, in the near future. Already, Galileo is working with IGNOS, for instance, at different airports in the world. Unfortunately, as I said, I cannot be with you in Kourou, but I can witness this launch later on from Brussels, where I will be today.
We are going to stay with ESA because we're very happy to have with us the Navigation Programs Director from ESA, Mr. Paul Verhoef. Welcome to you.
Good morning, George.
You're up early.
Very early. We've had already a long night, but this is the business.
It's the space business. Okay, we have a few minutes to find out about the space business and especially about the Galileo business. Let me ask you this. We're well into deployment of the Galileo system, but for people just tuning in, can you give us a brief overview of what the system is all about?
Yes. In order to receive or to locate your position in devices like this, or in devices in boats, or in cars, or in airplanes, there is a chip in here which needs to receive at least 4 signals from 4 satellites, and it calculates your position. So what we are providing is the satellites, the ground infrastructure to go with it, so that in millions, or 100 millions, even billions of devices around the world, the positions can be calculated.
Now, the Americans have a system which is up and running, and the Russians have a system that's up and running, the Chinese, I think, as well.
Yeah.
What is Galileo bringing that is new or is interesting that we should know about?
Well, the other systems were primarily, in the beginning, designed for military purposes. We have, from the start, designed a system for civil purposes. We have quite a number of different user groups who have different requirements from satellite navigation signals. So we provide for all these user groups the different signals they are using.
Okay, this is, if I count correctly, the 9th Galileo mission. If we go back to the in-orbit validation testing, which went back in, I think, maybe 10 years ago, is there anything special about the launch today that we should know about?
Yes, the launch today is special because indeed we get to about half of the constellation, and with half of the constellation we are able to provide initial services.
And these initial services, that means what, initial commercial services?
It means that we are offering a certain guarantee of a certain minimum performance of the system, which allows, for some of the surfaces, experimentation, and it allows, for example, in devices like mobile phones, that they are going to be used together with GPS in order to calculate position. Obviously, the chips in the phones need to be activated for that, and it needs to be the most modern smartphones, which they are, but we expect that over the next years they will be made available.
Okay, the DDO has just called out, or is going to call out, the final launch sequence. That means we're moving into the final moments of final count, and it's a very critical moment, but it means that we're moving as we should, all on schedule. Okay, final question for you. This is, I believe, for now anyway, the final Soyuz for the moment to launch some Galileo satellites, because we're changing launchers. We're going to have an Ariane 5 launch next time, I believe, at the end of the year. Why the switch?
Yes, we're going to launch with Ariane 5 on the 17th of November, the first of 3. And we're doing that because we want to speed up the deployment of the constellation. And with the 3 Ariane 5s, we can each time launch 4 satellites at a time in each of the 3 orbital planes of the constellation.
So we'll be at how many by...
By then we will be at 26. And after that we have to complete the constellation, and we go to replace satellites which are at the end of their lifetime. So we do it at a lower pace, and we foresee to do that with the new Ariane 6 or with Soyuz.
Okay, and after that, can you look ahead after that briefly?
We're going to do this for a long, long time.
Okay. We are out of time already. Paul Verhoef from the European Space Agency. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George.
We've set the scene for you. Now we have the broadcast coming up. Paul is going to take his place behind us here in the fishbowl, going back to work. I'm going to join my colleague for the English commentary, Alfredo Quiles, up there in the broadcast booth. You can follow in French with Thierry Bouvard. And while we're changing places here, take a look at the first of many films coming up for you. This is the launcher campaign, and it'll show you how Soyuz is put together and prepared for her mission today. And we'll be back with more after.
On March 21st, began the launch campaign in the 3-stage integration building, the MIC, with the frigate upper stage preparation.
Frigate preparations for this mission began in the MIC just after departure of the frigate used for the last Soyuz launch, number 14. The campaign for this launch was temporarily halted during operations for Soyuz 14, and just after its launch, integration of the lower 3 stages for Soyuz 15 began in the MIC, along with its frigate fueling operations. The 2 campaigns were carried out back-to-back by the same teams.
The VS-15 launch campaign began on the 5th of April with the arrival of the 2 Galileo spacecraft at Félix Éboué Airport in Cayenne. As usual, spacecraft preparation was performed in the S-1A payload facilities for 3 weeks and a half, and filling operations followed in S-3B building from the 2nd to the 9th of May. D-4 dedicated to the spacecraft encapsulation under the Soyuz fairing in the S-3B payload facility.
Last Friday, the 3-stage was transferred from MIC to launch zone, where the launcher was erected on a vertical position, immediately followed by the connections between the launcher and the launch pad. By the afternoon, once the gantry was moved on position to get access to the different launcher's levels and to protect it till 1 hour before liftoff, it is the turn of the upper composite to be transferred from S-3B building to the launch zone and integrated onto the 3-stage. Are connected the electrical and fluid links and the fairing venting system. It is also the day of the range dress rehearsal. On Monday, May 23rd, the launch readiness review gave the green light to begin the final countdown operations. From that checkpoint, the launcher and the satellites are ready for their journey.
Here, for the first time at Europe's spaceport, we'll be launching 2 Soyuz vehicles with less than a month's interval.
Joshua Jampel back here with Alfredo Quiles, head of the Navigation Security Office for Galileo and EGNOS. Welcome to you.
Welcome. Thank you, Josh, and welcome to everyone listening, in particular in the operational sites.
Speaking about the operational sides, people are working in other places along the launch base than here where we are in Jupiter. We're showing you some of those. This is the launch center. These people are closer to the pad than we are in Jupiter because their job is to monitor all Soyuz systems right down to the launch. Once the launcher leaves the pad, their work is done. They're working inside a 2-story bunker made of reinforced concrete. The roof is lined with 2 meters of concrete to protect them.
Yeah, the European team is led by the launch operations manager, Jean-Luc Barlet, whom you saw in the screen. He's the interface between the manager of the Russian team and the Jupiter building. The Russian's operation chief today is Alexander Cherevan. He works alongside representatives of the main Russian firms participating in the program, like NPO Lavochkin, RKT's Progress, and others. In all, over 100 people are now monitoring the final countdown operations.
Other people working are at the CVI, that's the Quick Look Telemetry Display Office, which sits atop the Montagne des Pères, which is behind us here in Jupiter. This is a spot where all the telemetry comes in.
Yeah, correct. The telemetry sent from...
Over to Claude Legrand and Remy Chevrier of the Quick Look Telemetry Center, whom we just saw, for a presentation of today's mission.
The launcher is composed of 2 parts. The first part is the Soyuz STB, composed of 3 stages. The second part is the nose module, composed of the frigate stage and the 2 satellites. 9 minutes after the liftoff, the Soyuz STB will inject the nose module into a suborbital orbit.
The flight of the Soyuz is tracked by Galileo station in French Guiana and by a station installed on a boat on the Atlantic Ocean.
After that, the frigate stage will manage a first boost of 13 minutes to inject the nose module into an intermediate orbit.
3 ground stations will follow this part of the flight. The boat station, Santa Maria on Azores Islands, and Osagel station near Toulouse. The end of the mission will be integrally tracked by New Nursia station near Perth in Australia.
During around 3 hours, a long ballistic phase will take place. After that, the frigate stage will manage a second boost of 4 minutes to inject the nose module into the separation orbit. At last, 3 hours and 48 minutes after the liftoff, the simultaneous separation of the 2 satellites will occur.
Remy and I will manage the real-time evaluation of the launcher data from the Soyuz Control Center. My colleague Antoine Courtois is in Moscow, where he will supervise the production of the orbital parameters.
Yeah, at minus 2 minutes 35, you will hear the DDO call out what the electrical umbilicals, those are the cables on the satellites, have been released. They drop into a metal basket designed for the purpose of retaining them.
2.5 minutes to go. About an hour ago, the gantry was moved back about 80 meters, revealing the launch vehicle that you see there. But there are many, many other launcher preparations that have already taken place.
Correct. At minus 4 hours 30, the tanks were filled with hydrogen peroxide. This took 20 minutes. Then at minus 3 hours 10, we filled the tanks with liquid oxygen. This took 45 minutes. And then at minus 2:55, they were filled with kerosene. These are all the different fuels that are used in the Soyuz vehicle.
Green status panels on the right continue to tell the story. All is go.
That's perfect. Once the launcher is filled, we have 3 days to launch. Otherwise, the fuel begins corroding the vehicle and it has to be emptied. But in this case, we are go.
We are fine for tonight. Just under 2 minutes. You will shortly see the people here in the hall moving out to the balconies on either side of Jupiter here. There's a fine view on the range, and people come here to take advantage of the fine weather and watch the launch. The DDO tonight, the voice you hear is Jean-Luc Voyer. That's the range operations manager from CNES. Thierry Villemart, whom we just saw, the Arianespace person who works with him. We want to say hello to everybody taking the broadcast tonight at ISA CNES Domenil in Paris in particular.
Yes, and also hello to everyone watching from Aztec.
Attention pour A0 moins 1 minute.
DDO is going to call out the 1 minute mark.
Perfect.
Top. A0 moins 1 minute.
You want to say hi to your people?
Yeah, hello to the people watching in ESTEC and also to the operational teams in ISOC and in the Fucino Control Center and the Oberhofen Control Center.
All right, here's some things to watch for the ignition sequence from minus 17 seconds to minus 6 seconds. The engines are tested automatically in 3 phases at about 20% of total thrust, then at an intermediate pressure about 50%. You see the arm falling away there. That's always a very exciting moment. And then finally at full throttle at minus 3 seconds. The order is given for the full throttle. We'll let the DDO call out the final countdown, and we'll be back after Soyuz has cleared the tower. Enjoy the liftoff.
What tower? There's no tower.
Le DDO décompte final. 10, 9,
Oh yeah.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Top, décollage.
Liftoff. Really? Is that server already?
Well, we are underway. Soyuz lifted off from French Guiana. I guess we lost her to the cloud cover because the camera is not following her. The people are already coming in from outside on the terrace. But this is the 250th Arianespace mission to fly from French Guiana. And do you know what number Soyuz flight this is?
15.
It's about 1860, no? 1860.
61.
It's true.
So there's nothing like it. There's a shot. I picked up our camera again of Soyuz burning. Tell me what went through your mind when you watched the liftoff.
Well, to be honest, happiness and relief. Lots of people have worked very hard on this here and in Europe, and it's fantastic to see it flying. We need these satellites.
The boosters and the central core or second stage are burning now. The boosters weigh 45 tons each at liftoff.
Yep.
The total mass is 178 tons of the first stage.
Yes, the engines run on liquid oxygen and kerosene, the same propellants which are used in each of the 3 lower stages.
And the second stage, similar to the boosters, its ignition occurred on the launch pad along with 20 engines at once on the launch pad. As you saw, this stage burns for about 4 minutes.
Yep.
Now remember, Soyuz weighed 300 tons at liftoff. Now, after separation of her boosters in about 2 seconds, can you guess what her weight will be? Just a guess.
It's about 135 tons. So this is very impressive. This means that it loses half her weight in about 2 minutes.
It's pretty amazing. There's the animation, the cartoon of what it looks like up there. On the bottom of your screen, on the bottom left, our altitude climbing towards 60 kilometers. On the right, our speed approaching 2 kilometers per second. Looking ahead, briefly, the mission is in 2 parts. After frigate separation, there will be, that's the 4th stage, there will be a first burn of its engine, which will last for 13 minutes. When this is over, frigate goes into what's called the ballistics phase, where it'll coast for about 3 hours, making its way toward where the satellites will be separated. And during this time, we'll cut away from the broadcast, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, we'll return in the air for the second frigate burn and satellite separation. It's interesting to see that Soyuz is built by RKT's Progress and the Samara Space Center, which also designs and develops the first 3 stages.
Soyuz, as we mentioned, goes back to the first days of the space race, introduced in 1966. It has everything going for it. It's a reliable vehicle, it's efficient, flexible, it's cost-effective, and has handled in one version or another, this is the second, it's an updated version for French Guiana, in all versions, all types of missions, from telecoms, Earth observation, to weather, science probes, Mars missions even, and it's the only manned vehicle able to reach the International Space Station. Isn't that right?
That's right, Josh. It's impressive. Some basic Soyuz facts. It orbited the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, and also the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, in 1961. Also the first woman in space, the first spacewalk, and also it has the highest demonstrated reliability record, close to 99%.
We've had jettisoning of the fairing, and you can see the two satellites exposed now to the elements. Those are the two black boxes. In the middle is the dispenser, which will push the two satellites away from each other when they are separated. Fairing measures how much? It's tall, right?
It's 4.1 meters diameter and 11.4 meters high. I was next to it yesterday, and it's really, really tall.
You were dwarfed.
Yes,
by
completely.
the fairing.
Yeah, and we can now get rid of it because we are high enough in the atmosphere, so there is not, actually the atmosphere is very thin, so there is no heating or friction, and then we don't need it to protect the satellites, and then by jettisoning it we have less weight and the launcher operates better.
So it's a good time to get rid of it now.
Yes.
We can also get rid of the second stage, which is coming up, the extinction of the second stage, coming up in about 3 seconds. You see the motor burning out, and separation of the second stage, ignition of the third stage. Give you an idea of what that looks like up above. One particularity of the Soyuz is, whereas with Ariane, if you know Ariane 5, we separate the lower stage before igniting the upper stage. Soyuz does just the opposite. The third stage is ignited 2 seconds before separation of the second stage. It's curious. The lower part of the third stage, which is called the skirt, is used to channel the flux of this third stage motor ignition down towards the lower stage, where it rebounds, which I guess gives an added thrust, right?
Exactly. This means that the third stage can start firing before separation of the launcher's two elements. This occurs at 282 seconds after liftoff. Before this version of Soyuz, without the frigate upper stage, it was the third stage that put the satellite into the initial Earth orbit, but not in this version. And you have to see that during these 10 seconds, the Soyuz will climb 4 kilometers, up to 153 kilometers.
You see our altitude over 170 kilometers and our speed 4.3 kilometers. We've been picked up by our first downrange tracking station. It's a boat, actually, in the Atlantic. It's the Naval Transportable Station developed by the CNES. The DDO's voice continues to call out that all is okay on board. He's saying the speed is nominal, the trajectory is nominal, and he says, also confirms that we've been picked up by the first downrange tracking station.
That's perfect.
Yep. We're going to go to a launch replay in just a minute, the first of several launch replays, actually, so you can relive those very exciting moments of liftoff. If it's the first time you've seen a launch,
I've seen several Soyuz launches.
Indeed. We have cameras at several of the, we set several of the observation sites along the base, and as they come in, we get their shots. Here comes the replay.
Bonne stabilisation du lanceur.
Lifting off rather rapidly.
Yes.
Much faster than Ariane 5, which is a much heavier vehicle, but not as fast as Vega, which goes up like an arrow.
I can imagine. Yes, I have never seen a Vega launch.
You should come down for that. I think you'd like that. The Galileo program began in 1999 when Europe decided to build its own satellite-based navigation system. Now I want to ask you, you're from ESA. What's ESA's role in the program?
Okay, Josh. There are basically three main bodies involved in Galileo. We have the European Commission, the European Union is the program manager funding it. And then we have European Space Agency. And then we also have the European GNSS Agency. GNSS stands for
GNSS?
Global Navigation Satellite Systems. So it gets into a complicated acronym. We call it GSA for short.
GSA, okay.
Yes.
And what does GSA do?
So first we are the architect. ESA is the architect. We have designed and developed the system, and we are in charge of making it work. And then GSA is in charge of implementing the services and maximizing the use of the Galileo signal.
So ESA overall, ESA's job is to oversee and fund the program?
No, the funding is done by the European Union.
Okay.
So we are in charge of designing and procuring the system. Right now we are in the finishing the deployment phase, which means that we are still finishing the deployment of the ground segment, and then at the end of the year we will start the exploitation phase. It's a different phase in which GSA, the European GNSS Agency, will have the role of exploiting the services, which will start this year in October with the initial services.
Soyuz continues to fly north. Her path is north, then east over Europe, where she's picked up by the Osagel station that is near Toulouse.
For separation.
Then she'll continue east over Russia, and then south, where she'll be picked up by Perth. In Australia, this station there will see separation of the two Galileo satellites, just actually south of Australia. Coming up on third stage separation at 175 kilometers. We're right where we should be.
Yep.
And you'll hear the DDO call out that confirmation there. It looks like this third stage is separated on the animation there.
Extinction du bloc I, séparation du bloc B.
The DDO has just confirmed it. You may have noticed that events are announced by DDO with a slight delay.
Yes.
Of just a couple of seconds. This is quite normal. Why? Because information, the telemetry and the radar, that comes into the ground stations that we've been talking about, then sent in here to Jupiter, have to be first confirmed. By whom? By our Russian teams. And where are they? Moscow.
In Moscow.
So they have to come here via Moscow. It takes just a few seconds.
Yes.
Then they come into the CVI, the Quick Look Center, which you saw earlier.
normal.
Everything normal on board, says the DDO. Can we talk about the ground segment now?
Yes, indeed. It's a very, very impressive ground segment. We have actually two, the control segment and the mission segment, and they are being used every day for the routine operations of the first satellites.
Right. You saw that the frigate has just been ignited. That's the first frigate burn, right on time. It'll go for 13 minutes.
That's very good. So, yes, the ground segment are being upgraded as we speak to increase their availability and operability. So we are implementing redundancies, so with the objective to have the two control centers with the deployment of the ground segments. In this case, for example, we will be able to switch over operations from one control center to the other with seamless upgrades in case of important failures.
And where are the control centers?
They are one in Fucino, Italy, and the other in Oberpfaffenhofen, Germany.
Right. Okay. So they share the duties.
Yes. In this case, this is what our target.
All right. Frigate is burning. She will continue to burn for another 12 minutes or so. Then there will be a second burn in about 3.5 hours. That's a shorter burn, 4 minutes. We'll explain why that's 1/3 of the length of the first burn, but we'll explain that when we get to it. After the first burn, this first burn that's occurring now, the upper composite, we call the composite what's left of the 300 tons. The upper composite is spun up during what we call the ballistics phase. We'll explain that when we get there, and that lasts about 3 hours.
Yeah, correct. The frigate will ignite her engine a second time for the 4-minute burn, which will circularize the orbit into the separation orbit for the satellites. Then the satellites will be released at 3 hours and 47 minutes after liftoff. These satellites weigh 730 kilograms each and will be separated together.
Now, why are they separated together?
It's more efficient this way. Then the frigate continues into its graveyard orbit, so that there will be a passivization later, and the satellites will start drifting into their target orbits.
Okay, we're going to a film on Galileo now, the first of a couple of them, presented by ESA, the European Space Agency.
In a clean room at the European Spaceport in Kourou, French Guiana, GalileoSat 13 and 14 are undergoing their final launch preparations. In these facilities dedicated to Galileo, ESA has prepared no less than 6 satellites during the last year, and now 2 more satellites will join the Galileo constellation. With the Galileo space component growing steadily, ESA has also worked on the Galileo ground segment.
On the ground, we have most of the installations in place around the world. We're talking about some 40 ground installations, stations spread out all over the globe. All of that is operational. It is not yet having all the full functionality which is needed, so we're currently building that out. For example, it needs to have the capability of actually working with up to 30 satellites in the future. So this is all being readied at the moment.
The ground segment is a key component for Galileo, with the 2 control centers, Oberpfaffenhofen in Germany and Fucino in Italy, processing the navigation signals and maintaining the constellation. They follow the satellites and give them commands through several telemetry and tracking stations. Another part of the ground segment are the Galileo sensor stations. They receive the timing and position signals produced by the satellites and send these back to the control centers. There, the satellite data is processed and the navigation is sent back to the satellite via the 5 uplink stations located around the globe.
They put the
It is
uplink
this
station
complex
somewhere.
network that allows Galileo to provide navigation data with pinpoint accuracy to the users. Today, ESA is working on the ongoing deployment of satellites to complete the constellation by 2020. However, with the ground segment ready and part of the constellation already deployed, Galileo services will soon become available.
The initial services will be announced towards the end of the year. We need to have a minimum set of the constellation in the ground segment in place in order to do that. This is being almost in place at the moment. We are currently verifying that this is all working fine. And what it means is that as of that moment, we can start using the Galileo services.
This means, for example, that the combination of Galileo and GPS will be available, which will increase the accuracy of satellite navigation data on smartphones or in vehicles. It's an exciting prospect that the services of the first publicly owned satellite navigation system are being made available to users for the first time. Another milestone for ESA and the European Commission. ESA will also continue to test other services which could become operational once the Galileo constellation is fully deployed.
We mentioned, Alfredo, what your job title is, but we haven't talked about what you do. How long have you been part of Galileo?
Okay, Josh, I joined almost 11 years ago the Galileo project in the ground segment. So
that's at the beginning almost.
Almost. By the time I joined, the contracts for the ground segment had started in January 2005. But yes, this means that I've been following the full cycle of development of the ground control segment and ground mission segment, especially, also in the validation. So this is very interesting because the Galileo ground segment was deployed in a progressive way, with the first important version released during the IOV phase, which is the in-orbit validation.
Right, that's 2005 or 2008.
Actually, yes, we launched the GEOVE satellites in 2005 and 2008, and then we launched the IOV satellites in 2011 and 2012. Before those IOV satellites were launched, we had to deploy the IOV ground segment, which was in both control centers already. But this was just the beginning. Then we had the deployment in the 2 control centers, and also the implementing the capability to switch over from one side to the other in a short period of time. This is what we have been working on, and is expected to be fully qualified in 2016.
So you've seen all the upgrades, and you've seen a lot of changes in the ground segment then?
Indeed.
Huh?
Yes, it's a lot of a big challenge, in particular because the controlling a constellation of 30 satellites is not so common in ESA missions. We typically control 1 satellite or 2, not 30. And we applied a solution that is based on well-proven systems, but its adaptation and the need to automate routine operations has been challenging, but successful. Also, in the ground mission segment is very complex. This implements the mission of the system, and it computes the navigation messages, and it's a real-time processing over a distributed architecture. So this, for example, the software developer is developed has 2 million lines of code with very stringent quality requirements.
Okay, we're going to another film now on Galileo. You can see more on how the system works.
The 30 satellites orbiting the Earth are supported by a worldwide ground segment. 2 control centers process the navigation signals and maintain the constellation. They follow the satellites and send them commands through the telemetry and tracking stations. The satellite signals broadcast Galileo time as well as position information. These signals are received by the Galileo sensor stations, which transmit them to the control centers. All the navigation data is computed and uploaded to the satellites via the uplink stations. The ULS network is tasked with uplinking the data to the satellites. There are 5 ULS sites around the globe, 4 on the equator and 1 near the North Pole. Thanks to this ground segment, your receiver can calculate your position with pinpoint accuracy. Your navigation instrument calculates its distance from a Galileo satellite by measuring the time that the signal takes to reach it. With one satellite, you can be anywhere on a circle. But as the time of your device is not very precise, 4 satellites are required to calculate your exact position. "30 satellites are ideal to cover the whole world. Galileo allows many different applications. In the air, on the ground, and at sea.
Well, somebody just coughed, and it wasn't me.
All is proceeding normally on board. If you just joined us, the first 3 stages have done their work. Only the frigate upper stage is functioning now. While you were watching that film, we were picked up by our downrange tracking station in France at Osogel. Now, we've been hearing about the 3 different orbital planes where the satellites are set in their slots. Can you explain why we need 3 orbital planes?
Yes, Josh. For a navigation system, what is very important is to have the satellites equispaced so that a user anywhere in the world can always pick as many satellites as possible. So one optimum combination is having 3 orbital planes separated by 120 degrees of longitude and inclined in 56 degrees with respect to the equator. Then this means that in each orbital plane, when the constellation is completed, there will be 10 satellites for each. Originally, there was a mission requirement for implementing the specific safety of life service, and then there was 1 backup in each orbital plane. So this meant 27 orbital operational satellites for the Galileo system.
Including the backups?
No, without the backups.
Without the backups.
That's 27 plus 3, 1 in each plane.
Right.
Now this requirement has been lifted, and the nominal constellation is at least 24 satellites. But we still have the objective to reach 30 satellites. As you saw in the video, this is ideal for the navigation system.
For covering...
yes.
Okay, the DDO continues to say that frigate continues to burn normally. Our Soyuz pad, just to get back down to Earth for just a moment, from where we lifted off, is the 7th in the world, and it was the most recent until this year. There are 2 Soyuz pads at Baikonur in Kazakhstan and 4 at Plesetsk, and the one here in French Guiana was modeled on those, of course. And a new pad, which is the world's 8th, was just built in Russia at Vostochny. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Vostok meaning east.
Correct.
And the only one, besides here, were the gantry.
Yes.
Used for their Soyuz pad. And the first launch over there just took place last April 27th. So the gantry is used only here and at the new Vostochny site. Yep. We're coming up on cutoff of the frigate engine. That'll be in about 1 minute. Tell us about the frigate now. It's an automatic vehicle. It's a flexible upper stage?
Yes, it's an autonomous flexible upper stage, a relatively recent addition, qualified in 2000. It has been designed to operate as an orbiter, and it extends the capability of the Soyuz vehicle, giving it access to a full range of orbits, low Earth orbit, sun-synchronous, medium Earth orbit, which is the one we are getting now.
And low Earth orbit is like the space station?
Exactly, 400, 900 kilometers.
Right.
And the MEO is a medium Earth orbit, is like 23,200, is what we are getting for Galileo.
And sun-synchronous is polar orbits?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. For Earth observation satellites, that's what you want. Also, geotransfer orbit is an elliptic orbit as an intermediate step to go to geostationary.
Cut off.
All right, you saw the cutoff of the frigate engine coming right on time. The first burn is over, and the frigate is going to coast for about 3 hours and a quarter. and then it'll reignite for the second burn. This is called the ballistics phase. Now, what exactly goes on during the ballistics phase besides coasting?
Well, basically the frigate will keep its altitude and will climb steadily into the final altitude. That is for the injection of all the satellites. It's very important that it keeps the correct attitude, and then in the meantime it just has to go up.
Has to climb up.
Yes, a lot.
Okay,
we are still very low, 625 kilometers.
Yeah, and eventually we're going up to 23,000 or
23,500. Yes. Measured from the sea level.
Confirmation de la première extinction du moteur frégate.
Okay, now Didier's just calling out extinction of the frigate burn. Our next film is on EGNOS, or how Galileo helps out with European navigation in the air.
Okay, after this film, I'm going to cut off this video.
Satellite navigation has become an integral part of our lives today. An area where satellite navigation plays a major role is air traffic control. For this safety-critical domain, the European Space Agency, ESA, the European Commission and Eurocontrol, the European Organization for the Safety of Air Navigation, developed EGNOS, which has been in use since 2011 and augments the existing GPS system. This increases the accuracy and the integrity of the position computed by the user. Nowadays, it has become an extremely reliable tool for pilots, helping them cope with whatever flying conditions they're faced with.
Now with the new EGNOS system, which is much more accurate than the normal GPS system, and we're able to get closer to the ground and be able to fly in weather that is with lower clouds or low visibility than we are used to.
Here in Denmark, bad weather or limited visibility is something that these air ambulances or rescue helicopters are confronted with all too often. Before EGNOS, up to 10% of the missions had to be cancelled due to poor weather conditions, a tragedy for patients whose safe and timely arrival at a hospital was often a matter of life or death. Now, with EGNOS, 3 geostationary satellites and a ground segment are working together to send an integrity signal to receivers in aircraft and helicopters. This increases the accuracy of the satellite navigation data to 1.5 meters. Guaranteeing its quality and improving vertical positioning.
We need that accuracy because of the terrain. We're getting very close to the mountains, and that's why we need a very accurate satellite system, and also not only an accurate, but also a reliable.
Today, the number of aircraft or helicopters using EGNOS is slowly rising. For instance, the Swiss Air Rescue Service, who fly over 11,000 missions a year, equipped their helicopters with the new technology, anticipating a nationwide adaptation of EGNOS. EGNOS is also relevant for civil aviation, as it can replace the traditional ground guidance systems needed for aircraft to land, providing a saving in the costs of local airport infrastructure. At Eurocontrol, experts are convinced EGNOS offers many benefits for aviation in Europe.
EGNOS can provide a more efficient service than we had in the past, including improving access to certain airports in adverse weather conditions. So better punctuality, fewer delays, less diversions to alternative airports.
More and more airports in Europe are now certified for landing approaches based on EGNOS. And what is happening in air traffic management will surely be extended in many other applications that need to rely on guaranteed satellite navigation signals. EGNOS will soon augment both GPS and Galileo navigation data. Relying on 2 constellations will further improve its performances and reliability.
Okay.
EGNOS was developed to
I'm going
provide
to cut this
accurate
video
and
here. I'm about to
guaranteed
verify
guidance to
the
aircraft.
satellite
Welcome back. Joshua Jampo here again with Alfredo Quiles of ESA, the head of the Security Office for Galileo at EGNOS.
Hello, Josh.
We hope you enjoyed the break. We are ready for the end of the mission. So is Soyuz, or I should say frigate. We are going to, in this next hour, have the second frigate ignition, and then we're going to have separation of the satellites. But first, a review of the mission in pictures. You recall 3 hours ago we lifted off in a blaze of fire from French Guiana. Soyuz taking off right on time at 8:48:43. Exactly, 8 minutes 48 seconds, 48
minutes.
8 o'clock, 48 minutes after 8 o'clock, 43 seconds.
Correct.
I got it right. And everything went fine.
Yes.
And we're going to see pictures of everything happening. She flew for her first minute. She was lost into the clouds early on. I think everybody here in the hall knows that. And then we picked her up with the camera a little later.
Yeah.
We had booster separation right on time. We had fairing separation.
Yes.
Right on time, as you saw. Second stage with the skirt.
That's the third stage.
Third stage with the skirt, yes. And
Le vol est nominal.
third stage separation. Leaving the frigate. The frigate first ignition, right on time, burned for 13 minutes. And shut down. After which, for the 3 hours, we were coasting. Now, during the interlude, our invited guests here in Jupiter got to visit the space base, saw up close the pads for Ariane and Soyuz. They also looked at the Galileo station here.
Yep.
And you went with them, didn't you? Now, what did you see?
Yes, I was one of the guides.
Before you tell us what you did, you can see we've had our second frigate ignition. We're now at 23,000 kilometers up. You can see on the lower left.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
That's
what did you
good.
see?
No, this is a very nice station. This was one of the first Galileo stations, and at a certain point it was our most complete station because it has the three types of stations. It has a sensor station to monitor the signals from the satellites. Has ULS station, uplink to uplink the navigation messages to the satellites, and also a TTC, the telecommand and tracking station, for controlling the satellites using the control segment. So it was it's a nice visit. It was a very interesting station for us.
So they enjoyed it?
Yes, I hope so.
Did you give the guided tour?
Yes.
And did they ask questions?
Yes, some of them.
What sort of questions did you give?
It's basically the most interesting question for everyone is why the TTC is such a large antenna. It's a 13.5 meter antenna.
That's a big dish.
It's
right?
a big dish.
It's a big white dish. That's
Big white dish, exactly. And why the ULS uplink station has a much smaller antenna. It's 3.5 meters. And there is a very interesting explanation for this. Is the TTC actually sends and receives signals from the satellites, and then therefore you need a large dish.
Right.
But the ULS station, it's only uplink. It does not receive any signal. So the antenna follows the satellite path, uplinking messages, and then these messages you see them on the downlink through L-band, and so it's only one way. And this allows it to be very fast, because also the Galileo was designed for safety of life applications, and then we needed to get messages to any user in the world within 6 seconds. And this meant having a system that would be able to track follow the satellites very quickly to uplink. And this is actually, that's why the design is for a small antenna, very flexible, full motion.
So it sounds like it was an interesting visit. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you. Maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Now, describe the climb, because when we left before the break, the frigate was at 2,000 kilometers up, and now you see we're 23,000, heading towards 24,000. She's approaching the range for satellite separation. That's due in about 9 minutes. Now, tell us what's happened in between.
Yes, you can see in the image from the transmission here to the right.
On the top right of the screen.
On the top right, exactly. You see how low we were at the beginning, and then how when the first burn of the frigate started, we were at 500 kilometers, and now we are in 23,500. So this was a really big climb for this frigate in ballistic mode. So with no external propulsion, just maintaining the attitude and with the correct trajectory.
If there's no
for the
external
injection.
propulsion, how does she climb?
Because you give a push at the beginning, the big delta V, which means that it gains velocity, and with this it starts to climb. This is the first law of Newton, the second law of Newton, I think, or the third, that basically any body in movement will keep moving.
Stays in motion.
Stays in motion until another external force is applied to it, which is what we are going to do on the second frigate ignition, because right now it's having an orbit that is not circular. It will get to the point of injection, but we need to circularize this orbit so that it will actually reach the correct injection orbit for the satellites.
Okay, all that is just ahead. Also ahead is the scheduled cutoff, the extinction of the second frigate burn. You see that happening on the screen, and we'll soon get the DDO's confirmation of that. Frigate is still flying. We're approaching separation of the two satellites due now in about 4 minutes. Yep.
Yes, and then there will be a third ignition for about 2 minutes to pacify or empty the upper stage of this fuel. When the frigate has separated the satellites, it will have this 7-minute passivation phase.
They do that with Ariane as well.
Yes, with actually anything that is put in orbit at the end of its mission life has to be passivized.
So they empty all the fuel.
Yes.
And then the stage goes into what you call the cemetery.
Yes, orbit. The graveyard orbit or cemetery. Exactly. And this is very important because it's one of the rules for putting things into space. So this takes place at 400 kilometers above the orbital slot of the satellites.
I think the DDO just confirmed that we had yes, we had a little radio interference there, but he just did confirm the extinction of the second burn. Now,
Perfect.
Remember the frigate can reignite its engines up to 20 times. Now, my question is to you, what sort of a mission would need 20 burns?
Well, actually, yes, it's designed as an orbiter. So, for example, a mission with very complex parameters, for example, to go to another planet, so interplanetary mission, they tend to have very complex maneuvers because they use gravity-assisted maneuvers to actually reach other planets. Otherwise, it is very expensive for a probe to get out of Earth and into other planets without gravity-assisted maneuvers. And these need start and stop burns. So this is why frigate is ideally designed for this kind of missions.
Now, are you talking about when, I think they call it flyby,
exactly.
when you use the planet's orbit to get into a sling effect and you
exactly.
go off in another
you use the planet's gravitatory field to actually fly by and acquire velocity and change direction to go into another planet. This is done very, very commonly since it was a type of mission that was invented, I think, in the 70s for the Voyager. I seem to remember. And for example, Rosetta did several flybys. This is standard now in interplanetary missions. It takes a long time because you need to have to do several orbits and flybys, but eventually you get there, and at much lower cost.
Okay, so we are going in 2 minutes to have separation of the Galileo satellites, but then after that we're going to have a bit of a wait for post-separation confirmation.
Correct.
Which may take some time, but we'll get back to that. I want to go into a little more detail about during the ballistics phase. During the long ballistics phase, the upper composite was in what they call also a barbecue mode, right? Now that means that it's turning just like a lamb on a spit.
Correct,
right?
exactly.
Now there's got to be a reason for that.
Indeed, it's because it allows the composite to be balanced thermically. The thing is that when you are in a space, there is a big difference in temperature when you are on the sun or you are in the shadow.
Yeah.
And this can be from plus 100 degrees to minus 100 degrees. So this big delta in temperatures is much better to compensate it by rotating slowly the frigate plus the dispenser plus the satellites, so that this thermal charge will be equally distributed in the satellites.
So that's why it goes. It gets cooked
exactly
thoroughly on all sides.
Like a chicken.
Like a chicken. Okay. Well, our chicken is due to separate the chicks.
Exactly.
In, just about 30 seconds.
That's that's very exciting.
We haven't had a chance to talk about the previous Galileo launches. I'd like to just do that. But just before we do that, I wanted to make one note that tonight's ESA mission comes only 29 days after the last Soyuz. Now that's worth noting, that Flight 14. And that smashes the record of 43 days between launches, Galileo launches.
That's very impressive.
Yeah, which was set in 2014 between flights 8 and 9, Galileo flights 8 and 9 in July and August. Now, scheduled separation, you see on the screen, the two satellites pushed from the mothership. Now, you were mentioning earlier that there's actually a 1 second delay. It's not perfectly simultaneous?
It's not 1 second. It's some milliseconds, I think. It's not completely contemporary, but it's almost instantaneous. For us, for humans, it's at the same time. And one thing is that one of the satellites is pushed along the orbit, and the other is in the contrary to the direction of flight. So this way they are perfectly separated, and then they start drifting lowering into their target orbits.
They're going lower now?
They're going lower now.
So this is our apogee altitude. Would you say our apogee is 23,567 on the lower left?
Yes,
roughly?
Yes. Actually, the final orbit is circular, so there is no apogee. The altitude will be always the same. It's simply that we inject in the frigate graveyard orbit, and then it's better this way to go slowly into their target orbit, which is 23,222 kilometers.
So the target orbit is lower than the
graveyard. Exactly.
So I'm assuming that means they don't use up any fuel getting there, or is that wrong?
Yeah, they will use some fuel.
Galileo x5.
They do. They use fuel just as if they were just as if they'd have to fly up higher to get to this slot. It's the same deal.
Yes, because you have to decelerate. And to decelerate, you also have to apply a force. It's this Newton law again.
Ah,
I got it.
Successful separation.
We're going soon to another replay.